10 days after Israel assassinated Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in an airstrike on a Beirut suburb, Israel said it had killed his replacement. That's according to Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. In a video released on Tuesday, Gallant said Hezbollah is an organization without a head. Nasrallah was eliminated. His replacement was probably also eliminated. Gallant gave no further details, but appeared to be referring to Hashem Safiaddin, who has not been heard from publicly since an Israeli airstrike last week. Hezbollah has not commented on Gallant's claim. Safiaddin is a cousin to Nasrallah. As head of Hezbollah's executive council, he has overseen the group's political affairs while also sitting on the Jihad Council, which manages its military operations. Safiaddin was not at the September 27th Hezbollah meeting in Beirut's southern suburbs when Israel struck, killing Nasrallah. He had been expected to be named the group's next Secretary General. His death would mark another in a series of top Hezbollah commanders killed by Israel in recent weeks. The fighting between Israel and the Lebanese militant group has escalated dramatically, with Israeli commandos raiding Hezbollah bases in southern Lebanon. The Israeli military said it was conducting, quote, limited, localized, targeted operations in Lebanon's southwest, having previously announced such operations in the southeast. Video released by the Israeli army on Tuesday purported to show a captured Hezbollah compound, replete with artillery and anti-tank weaponry. Hezbollah and Israel have traded fire for the past year, with the militia group launching rockets into Israel in support of Hamas, following its October 7th attack. On Tuesday, Israel said Hezbollah fired more than 100 rockets over the border toward Haifa and the Galilee. In a televised speech on Tuesday, Hezbollah deputy leader Naim Qassem said he supported efforts to secure a truce. He said the group's capabilities were intact, despite what he called painful blows from Israel. It was the first time that he had not mentioned an end to the war in Gaza as a precondition for halting combat on the Israel-Lebanon border.
Palestinians held a funeral on Tuesday for more than 15 killed in an Israeli attack, which struck a camp for displaced people in Gaza's Deir al-Balah overnight. That's according to Gaza's health ministry. Witnesses said the airstrike destroyed buildings and tents. The air and ground offensive into the territory is ongoing. Residents of Gaza's Jabalia said Israel had sent tanks deeper into their city on Tuesday, advising people to leave while it pounded the refugee camp from the air. Israel has said its attack on Jabalia was an attempt to stop Hamas fighters from regrouping there and staging attacks. Health officials said dozens had been killed in Gaza in the past 24 hours. The armed wing of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad said fighters had attacked Israeli forces in the north with anti-tank rockets, and that there were casualties among Israeli troops. These attacks came a day after the first anniversary of the Israel-Hamas war, which saw Hamas militants storm through Israeli towns, killing 1,200 and taking around 250 hostages, according to Israel's tallies. Israel's retaliatory offensive in Gaza has killed nearly 42,000 Palestinians, the enclave's health ministry says. Most of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been displaced, and humanitarian conditions have deteriorated sharply.
Mozambicans are voting on Wednesday in an election that's almost certain to see the ruling party, Frelimo, maintain its half-century grip on power. But whoever wins will inherit an economy being battered on several fronts. It's not completely certain who will win this election. President Filipe Nyusi is stepping down after 2 terms, and his Frelimo party's candidate, Daniel Chapo, is widely expected to replace him. But the former radio announcer and law lecturer faces an independent candidate who has captured the support of disenchanted youth. Political analysts like Adriano Nuvunga say Venancio Mondlane poses the biggest threat to Frelimo in years, though Nuvunga thinks the status quo will remain.
Mozambique's democracy is Frelimo dominated, is Frelimo captured.
Frelimo has ruled the Southeast African nation since independence from Portugal in 1975. Since first allowing elections in 1994, opponents and election observers have consistently accused Frelimo of rigging them. It denies the accusation. The winner of the election will face a tight squeeze on the economy as the country emerges from a financial crisis. Rising borrowing costs are piling the pressure on its 34+ million people.
There are a lack of opportunities in this country. There is no employment for youth.
The country is also struggling with debt nearly as big as its annual GDP. And delayed gas revenues mean it's running out of options to refinance its debt. Mozambique is still reeling from a decade-old so-called tuna bond scandal. It involved loans for a fishing fleet, partly funded by Credit Suisse, that went missing. That led the country to default on its debt and the International Monetary Fund to suspend lending. Last year, the Swiss bank settled out of court, and Mozambique struck a $456 million deal with the IMF in 2022. But that program expires next year and will have to be renegotiated. Islamic State-linked militants launched an insurgency in a gas-rich northern province in 2017. It's killed thousands of civilians, destroyed livelihoods, and internally displaced hundreds of thousands, aid agencies say. It has also disrupted multi-billion-dollar energy projects that are seen as the future of the country's economy. The government has contained the insurgency with help from regional troops and Rwanda, but there has been a surge in deadly attacks since the start of the year. Mozambique is also one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, vulnerable to extreme climate shocks like droughts, cyclones, and floods. Cyclone Freddy tore through Mozambique last year, as well as neighboring Malawi and Madagascar. It was one of the deadliest to hit the continent in 2 decades, killing over 1,000 people.
Kitchens like this have been a crucial safety net for those left destitute by Sudan's war. But after 17 months of violence, the volunteers who run them say dangers and a lack of funds are making it difficult to continue. The conflict between Sudan's military and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has created the world's largest hunger and displacement crisis. In the northern countryside of Omdurman, beneficiary Hafiz Abdallah says families are completely dependent on this kitchen for all their meals.
If I didn't get a meal for any reason, I would be really affected as I cannot afford a meal for the children.
The backdrop is that international aid organisations, including the United Nations, have been struggling to get aid to those who need it most. Relief workers say both sides have deployed siege-like tactics to prevent food and other supplies reaching their opponents. Instead, international organisations have ramped up their support for community groups. However, 10 volunteers told Reuters that the groups have been turned into targets for looters from the RSF. Both sides have also attacked or detained volunteers on suspicion of collaborating with their opponents, 12 volunteers said.
They are on the front line.
Mathilde Vu is advocacy manager for the Norwegian Refugee Council. It began supporting local responders in Sudan last year.
They're being detained, they're being harassed, they're being looted. And, this is all part of the warring parties not respecting really the protection of civilians, right? And not also seeing that these people are a key chain of the humanitarian system. And under international humanitarian law, they should be protected. And frankly, they're not right now.
Many communal kitchens are operated by a loose network of community groups known as emergency response rooms. Both the Army and RSF distrust them. That's because they include people who were members of grassroots resistance committees that led pro-democracy protests in 2019. That uprising toppled former autocrat Omar al-Bashir. The army joined forces with the RSF to stage a military coup 2 years later, but rivalries between them erupted into open warfare in April 2023. Both the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces did not respond to requests for comment for this report. The RSF has previously denied targeting aid workers. It said any rogue elements who did so would be brought to justice. The military has also said it does not target aid workers. However, it says anyone who collaborates with the RSF is subject to arrest. A UN fact-finding mission has said that 65 cases tried by army-convened courts against alleged commanders and employees of the RSF as of June, 63 targeted activists and humanitarian workers. They include members of emergency response rooms, the mission said in its report. Meanwhile, hunger is spreading. UN officials say more than 25.6 million people, more than half Sudan's population, are experiencing acute hunger and need urgent assistance. Parts of the country are at risk of famine, and in the worst hit areas, residents have resorted to eating dirt and leaves. Emergency response rooms have set up 419 kitchens that aim to serve over 1 million people daily in Khartoum state alone. That's according to one state organiser, Abdallah Gamar. He said volunteers have struggled to secure the $1,175,000 needed every month. In September, he said they received around $614,000. At the kitchen in Omdurman, Supervisor Heba El Sanossi says they only receive a few donations. Aid is distributed by the government, she says, and most of it does not reach them. If just a part of this aid arrived, she says, we could serve the community better.
North Korea's army has said it will completely cut off roads and railways connected to South Korea, starting from Wednesday. That announcement on state broadcaster KCNA likely indicates a further escalation in activity close to the demarcation line separating the two Koreas. In recent years, such activity had been rare. But this year, according to South Korea's military in July, North Korea has spent months installing landmines and barriers and creating wasteland across the heavily militarized border. The General Staff of the Korean People's Army said in a statement on KCNA that it was responding to war exercises that have been held in South Korea. The statement, which called South Korea the primary hostile state and invariable principal enemy, also pointed to frequent visits by US strategic nuclear assets in the region. South Korea's defense ministry said that the United Nations Command had been notified, but declined to give specifics. The UNC is a US-led multinational military force that oversees affairs in the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas, which remain technically at war.
In Chile, organic waste from food markets has become a lifeline for ranchers struggling during drought. An NGO called Refeeding Foundation has amassed a network of 600 volunteers that collect food waste from Santiago markets so the group can reuse it as livestock feed. Refeeding Foundation's president, Cristobal Marino, explains.
On average, we are collecting 10 tons of organic surplus, which go to different areas of water scarcity, or drought in this case. And these are families whose livelihoods depend on animals.
Marino says they have successfully converted over 800 tons of organic waste into animal feed. It's really good because at this moment we are lacking forage for the animals, says this farmer. Chile has been experiencing severe drought in recent years that has disrupted local industries such as agriculture, mining, and beekeeping. While an El Niño weather pattern brought strong winter rains and snow in the middle of the year, a La Niña pattern is in the forecast, which could indicate drier weather.
Wall Street's main indexes finished higher on Tuesday as investors shifted their focus to upcoming inflation data and the start of third quarter earnings season. The Dow gained 0.3%, the S&P 500 added about 1%, and the Nasdaq climbed roughly 1.5%. High-growth stocks jumped, with shares of Nvidia climbing more than 4% for their largest one-day percentage increase in a month. Apple, Tesla, and Meta platforms also closed higher. Despite those gains, Chris Konstantinos, managing partner and chief investment strategist at Riverfront Investment Group, said he still sees a long-awaited rotation from growth to value-oriented stocks taking shape.
The reason that it might actually have legs this time and be for real is because the Federal Reserve is in this easing type of backdrop where financial conditions are easier, interest rates are dropping, and a lot of the quote unquote value oriented sectors, things like financials, for instance, are quite rate sensitive. And as interest rates fall, if they can continue to fall, then this might actually be a backdrop for things like U.S. small cap to get a bid. Things like energy stocks, financials, materials, this sort of reflationary backdrop with easy monetary policy, and you might, God forbid, you might even get a rotation in international stocks, which many global investors have been waiting for 15 years.
Other notable stock moves included PepsiCo, which gained about 2% after the snack maker trimmed its forecast for annual sales growth, but reported adjusted earnings per share above estimates. But U.S.-listed shares of Chinese companies slid, with Alibaba Group, JD.com, and PDD Holdings all suffering losses.
Foxconn announced Tuesday it's building a major superchip facility in Mexico. It said it will be the world's largest manufacturing location for bundling NVIDIA's super chips. The chips are a key component of the US firm's next-generation Blackwell family computing platform. Benjamin Ting is a leading figure at Foxconn.
We're building the largest GB200 production facility on the planet.
Foxconn is the world's largest contract electronics manufacturer and known as Apple's biggest iPhone assembler. It's done well from the artificial intelligence boom as it assembles servers used to process AI work. NVIDIA said in August it had started shipping Blackwell samples to its partners and customers after tweaking its design. It expects several $1 billion in revenue from these chips in the fourth quarter. Ting said the partnership between his company and NVIDIA was very important and that demand for NVIDIA's Blackwell platform was awfully huge. Foxconn already has a large manufacturing presence in Mexico and invested more than $500 million to date in the state of Chihuahua. Chairman Young Liu said the company's supply chain was ready for the AI revolution. He added the company's outlook in the current quarter was strong, though he did not give details. On Saturday, Foxconn posted its highest ever revenue for the third quarter on strong demand for AI servers.
Elon Musk's X is back in business in Brazil. On Tuesday, the country's Supreme Court allowed the social network to resume service. That's after X started complying with rulings Musk had previously vowed to fight. The platform had been blocked in one of its largest markets since late August, after it refused to comply with orders regarding the moderation of hate speech. X also failed to name a legal representative in the country, as required by law. Musk denounced the orders as censorship, calling Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes a dictator. However, he started to reverse course over recent weeks. X has since blocked accounts listed by the court, named a local representative, and paid pending fines. In Tuesday's ruling, Moraes ordered Brazil's telecoms regulator to allow the social network back online within 24 hours. X said it was proud to return and would continue to defend freedom of speech within the boundaries of the law. Brazil's communications minister called the outcome a victory for the country. The standoff had seen many users in Brazil migrate to rival platforms like Blue Sky and Threads, owned by Facebook parent Meta. That threatened to undermine X in what was its sixth biggest market worldwide, with over 21 million users as of April.
New lawsuits filed against TikTok on Tuesday accused the popular social media platform of harming and failing to protect young people. The lawsuits were filed separately in New York, California, the District of Columbia, and 11 other states. They expand Chinese-owned TikTok's legal fight with U.S. regulators and seek new financial penalties against the company. The states accuse TikTok of using intentionally addictive software designed to keep children watching as long and often as possible, and misrepresenting its content moderation effectiveness. They also argue that TikTok seeks to maximize the amount of time users spend on the app to target them with ads. Washington, D.C.'s Attorney General alleged TikTok operates an unlicensed money transmission business through its live streaming and virtual currency features. TikTok said it strongly disagreed with the claims, quote, many of which we believe to be inaccurate and misleading. TikTok provides safety features including default screen time limits and privacy defaults for minors under 16, the company said. The U.S. Justice Department sued TikTok in August for allegedly failing to protect children's privacy on the app. Other states previously sued TikTok for failing to protect children from harm, including Utah and Texas. TikTok on Monday rejected the allegations in a court filing. TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance is battling a U.S. law that could ban the app in the United States.
Google could be forced to break up. The US said Tuesday it may ask a judge to make the search giant sell off businesses like its Chrome browser and Android phone operating system. It all flows from an August court ruling when Google was found to be operating an illegal monopoly in search. Now the Justice Department is considering what penalties to demand, with a breakup among the options. Another would be to require Google to supply rivals with the indexes, data and models it uses for search functions. Officials could also seek to stop payments the firm makes to have its search engine pre-installed or set as the standard option for new devices. Google pays billions every year to companies like Apple to secure default status for its products. The proposed fixes will also extend to ensuring the firm doesn't build a new monopoly in artificial intelligence. Google denies all the charges against it and plans to appeal the case. But some of the possible remedies have previously been backed by smaller rivals like search engine DuckDuckGo. Review site Yelp, which sued Google over search in August, says spinning off its Chrome browser and AI services should be considered. Now the Justice Department is expected to submit more detailed proposals to the court by November 20th. Google will have a month after that to put forward its own ideas. Whatever happens, it's likely to shrink the firm's revenues and reshape how Americans use the internet.
TSMC easily beat both market and company forecasts for third quarter revenue. The world's largest contract chip maker said Wednesday it scored big from artificial intelligence demand. The Taiwanese firm includes Apple and Nvidia among its customers and is a big player in the march towards AI. Revenue in the July-September period of this year came in at around $23.6 billion, growing more than a third from a year before. In September alone, reported revenue also jumped close to 40% year-on-year. The company did not provide details in its brief statement. TSMC will report full third quarter earnings for October 17th, when it will also update its outlook. The company's Taipei-listed stock has risen almost 3/4 so far this year. It closed up 1% on Wednesday, ahead of the release of the revenue numbers.
Talks broke down between Boeing and the Machinists Union Tuesday. The company withdrew a pay rise offer for striking workers, and no new talks with the union are scheduled. Over 30,000 workers have been on strike for 3 weeks. The International Association of Machinists is seeking a 40% pay rise over 4 years. They also aim to restore a pension plan workers lost 10 years ago. However, on Tuesday, Stephanie Pope, the head of Boeing's commercial planes business, told workers in a note that the union did not seriously consider the company's proposals and further negotiations do not make sense. More than 90% of workers voted down an offer of a 25% pay rise over 4 years before going on strike. Last month, workers rejected an improved plan from Boeing, which the company described as its best and final, which would give a 30% pay rise and restore a performance bonus. The plane maker, which was under pressure over its 737 MAX jet's reliability issues, is undergoing a cash squeeze. In mid-September, Boeing furloughed tens of thousands of employees, halting production of its best-selling 737 MAX jet and other lines. It's on the brink of losing its prized investment-grade credit rating. S&P on Tuesday said it placed Boeing's rating on CreditWatch negative, saying the company will likely seek incremental funding. Earlier on Tuesday, sources told Reuters Boeing is mulling a sale of stock and equity-like securities to raise billions of dollars.
Shares in the 7-Eleven parent firm soared Wednesday on news it faces an increased takeover offer. Bloomberg says Canada's Alimentation Couche-Tard has upped its bid for Japan's 7&I to $47 billion. That would be an increase of more than a fifth on its initial bid, which was rejected. 7&I shares surged over 10% immediately following the news, but then settled back to end the day with a gain of 4.7%. Now an increased offer could put pressure on the firm's board to consider accepting. The company said the previous bid grossly undervalued it and said it was focused on its own plans to boost corporate value. If the deal now goes ahead, it will be the largest ever overseas buyout of a Japanese firm. Seven & i has been under pressure from foreign investors to divest non-core businesses and focus on its convenience stores. Recent reports have suggested it could sell stakes in its supermarket and banking units. The company has also faced criticism from some of its own franchise operators in Japan. Several told Reuters that the firm was guilty of management missteps, including the high-profile collapse of a cashless payment service. Meanwhile, its shares have failed to impress investors. Over the 5 years to mid-August, just before the first bid was made, they rose around 60%. But Japan's benchmark Nikkei index more than doubled over the same period.
Now wants a ceasefire, and
delinked from Gaza.
Yeah, delinked from Gaza. That they just want a ceasefire on its own terms. And I think my initial response to this is, where have they been for a year? For a year, the world has been calling on Hezbollah to stop the attacks across the border into Israel. And for a year, Hezbollah said they would not do it unless there was a ceasefire in Gaza. They linked the two when the international community was saying, stop the fighting. And Israel was saying, if Hezbollah stopped attacks across the border, Israel would stop its attacks in response against Hezbollah. So for a year, you had the world calling for this ceasefire. You had Hezbollah refusing to agree to one. And now that Hezbollah is on the back foot and is getting battered, suddenly they've changed their tune and want a ceasefire. We support Israel's efforts to degrade Hezbollah's capability, but yes, ultimately we do want to see a diplomatic resolution to this conflict. We believe that is ultimately the only resolution that will provide real, lasting security to both the Israeli and Lebanese people.
The worst storm hit Florida in over a century.
U.S. President Joe Biden said fleeing Hurricane Milton was a matter of life and death on Tuesday, and he urged those ordered to evacuate to do so immediately, after the massive storm lashed Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula with heavy rain and wind on its way to Florida's Gulf Coast. A view from the International Space Station showed a monster storm that's expected to grow even larger before making landfall in the Tampa Bay area on Wednesday. Highways leading out of the area were jammed with evacuating Floridians. A direct hit on the bay would be the first since 1921.
Milton underwent what we call rapid intensification.
Dr. Daniel Guilford is a climate scientist for Climate Central.
Rapid intensification is something that is becoming more common in a warming world. We know that as human beings increase the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, largely by burning fossil fuels, we are increasing the temperature all around the planet. And in certain places like the Gulf of Mexico, temperatures are actually growing faster than around other places on the planet over the ocean. And that means that there's a lot more fuel available to these storms than there would have been if we hadn't burned greenhouse gases.
While Milton's intensity was likely to fluctuate, it was also expected to double in size, putting hundreds of miles of coastline within the storm surge danger zone, according to the National Hurricane Center. Florida's densely populated west coast is still reeling from the devastating Hurricane Helene less than 2 weeks ago. Relief efforts remain ongoing throughout much of the U.S. Southeast after Helene made landfall on September 26th, killing more than 200 people across 6 states and causing billions of dollars in damage.
We fled from the bombing, from the rockets that were coming to us. Our homes were destroyed. Come and see the people who are displaced here. They have been humiliated.
Is there anyone who's not scared of war? Especially, we have a child with us. God help us and help the people.
The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has today decided to award the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry with one half to David Baker, University of Washington, USA, for computational protein design, and the other half jointly to Demis Hassabis and John Jumper, Google DeepMind, United Kingdom, for protein structure prediction.